Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Courtney McAlilly, and I'm the Community Impact Pillar Lead for Women Lead. And I would like to thank you for joining us for our first Lunch and Learn. Women Lead has partnered with Safe Alliance today to learn tools and tips on identifying domestic violence in the workplace. Carl Tinkham, the Director of Sales for Power Systems, will be our host today and introduce our guest speaker with Safe Alliance, who will go over key statistics as well as advice on how to approach this topic in the workplace. We will have time at the end of the presentation for any questions you may have regarding domestic violence. First, we're going to take a quick minute for safety. So this is a virtual meeting, but please just be mindful of your surroundings. If you could, I think everybody except for the panelists are visible. Only the panelists are visible. So if you could just please turn your phones on silent and try to give our guest speaker your attention. If you are in a space with anybody else, just maintain your distance. Make sure you're using soap and water to wash your hands. If you're feeling sick, stay at home. And then if you're in a larger area, just be mindful of your surroundings and that there are no trip hazards. So now I'm going to turn it over to our host, Carl Tinkham.
Carl, you'll need to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Good morning. As Courtney said, I'm Carl Tinkham. I'm the Director of Sales here in the Power Systems Division. A couple weeks ago, I was very excited to see the announcement from CTE that we are partnering with several nonprofit organizations this year through our grants program, which is targeting strengthening the resiliency of our overall region that we cover at CTE through education, technical training, and facility construction and support. I'm extremely proud that one of these organizations that we're working to support is Safe Alliance, which is a Charlotte-based organization whose mission is to provide hope and healing to those that are impacted by domestic violence and sexual assault. The people that rely on Safe Alliance are going through a life emergency, and we are working with Safe Alliance to ensure that their emergency power system provides the safety and security that people at Safe Alliance need. Domestic violence can be a very uncomfortable topic to discuss, and it can lead to many inaccurate myths and false information. A couple of the common assumptions that are actually myths that we're going to learn more detail about are: one, that domestic violence is rare. Another one is that domestic violence only impacts women. A third myth is that domestic violence only occurs in low-income families. And another myth is that domestic violence is a one-time isolated incident. I'm part of over 1,750 teammates here at CTE, and we have a shared purpose of being a trusted partner. A big part of being a trusted partner for each and every one of our coworkers is to look out for each other. This session today that Women Lead has put together is important to help us all learn and understand facts about domestic violence, and will help all of us gain tools and knowledge to identify it in the workplace so that we can be more powerful allies for our coworkers. Sarah-Kate Pease is here joining us today from Safe Alliance. And with that 1,750 sets of eyes we have here at CTE, the information she shares with us in a few moments will help all of us improve our ability to see signs of abuse and help us prepare all of us to be better allies and trusted partners for our 1,750 coworkers. Sarah-Kate is the Director of Corporate and Community Engagement with Safe Alliance. She's going to educate us on statistics of who is affected, provide us with tools to identify domestic violence in the workplace, at church, at other places, social organizations throughout our lives where we interact with others. And she'll share information with us on what we can do as an ally if someone we know in or outside of our organization may be experiencing abuse. As the Director of Corporate and Community Engagement, Sarah-Kate furthers Safe Alliance's mission of providing hope and healing to survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault by building relationships and raising funds from corporate and community partners. Sarah-Kate has a master's in public administration and over 10 years of experience in arts, higher education, and social services nonprofits. We're going to play a powerful video now that further explains Safe Alliance's mission, and then we'll turn the program over to Sarah-Kate.
I loved him, and he was a functioning human being, and we had a good life in a lot of ways. You know, we had a family. I was just in disbelief that it could be happening. His texts and emails and phone calls became more frantic. You know, if he texted me and I didn't text him right back, I would get a barrage of texts or phone calls. And if I didn't answer the phone, there were threats. You better answer the phone, you better, it's always you better. I just felt trapped.
Fear is really an absence of freedom to me. I remember us having an argument and like the gun was right on the dresser, and he would literally like look at me and then look at the gun and then look at me, and it was kind of like a fear tactic. I was just broken. I was broken and I was feeling worthless, and my thinking was eventually he'll stop and everything will be okay. Ultimately, when I saw the fear in my children's eyes, that was my motivating force for leaving the situation.
Abusers can take so much from you, financially, mentally, physically, but they can't take your future.
Good morning. Thank you for calling Safe Alliance Domestic Violence Shelter. This is Monica speaking. How can I help you?
Hi, Monica. My name is Audra. I wanted to call because my abuser, he's escalating again, and I'm afraid to go back to the court system to ask for a new restraining order. I'm embarrassed and kind of ashamed, and I just wanted to call and talk to someone about it.
Well, first off, what you're doing right now is definitely a brave honor to yourself as well as your family.
It took 1.5 years for me to make that call. As soon as the operator answered the phone, I felt like she just wrapped her arms around me and reminded me that I deserve to live a life without harassment and fear, and that I should keep fighting for myself. What the people at Safe Alliance do, that changes lives, that saves lives. That gives people the strength to continue moving forward in their life, and also just bringing awareness to those victims and survivors of all the other resources there are out there for them.
I really rebuilt my life here. The classes, the counseling, there was counseling for the children. We got training on resumes and jobs, and there were people who would allow us to see that there is hope after this.
To me, Safe Alliance was a lifeline and still is. I had no idea how much time and effort and money it would take to get a restraining order in place, to get a custody agreement in place. That's why I wish I had called earlier, because I think once you walk in the doors of Safe Alliance, you have that support.
So one thing I really would like people to know about domestic violence, about sexual assault, is that it really could be anyone. It could be your mother, it could be your sister, it could be your aunt. It really transcends race, it transcends gender, it transcends class. 1 in 4 women are affected by domestic violence and sexual assault at any given moment. And now that I'm free from that, I'm really just doing everything I ever wanted to do. I graduated with my bachelor's, and I'm also working on a master's and simultaneously working on a doctorate. And when I'm not doing all those wonderful, great things, I'm being a full-time engaged pregnant mother. I know it's a lot, but I wouldn't be in this place that I am in my life right now had it not been for the strength and the courage that I gained at Safe Alliance. They're really changing lives, and they definitely changed mine.
Hi, everyone. I am Sarah-Kate Pease. Thank you so much for that introduction, Carl, and thank you for everyone for joining us for this Lunch and Learn and taking moments of your day today to learn about domestic violence and what you can do to be an ally, both in your work community and in your personal networks. So I thought we could start by kind of giving some statistics around the myths that Carl promoted when he kicked off this discussion. So the first myth is that domestic violence is rare. This is false. Domestic violence impacts 1 out of 4 women throughout their lifetimes. The next stat is that domestic violence only impacts women, and that is also false. There's actually statistics and research that show that 1 in 10 men are impacted by domestic violence during their lifetime. So these are just staggering numbers. If we'd had the opportunity to gather in person, we often do an exercise with name tags at the beginning where I'll put a purple dot on that and ask people with the purple dot to stand up. But 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10, that's a lot of folks within your organization that have personally experienced this. The third myth is that domestic abuse only occurs in low-income families. This is absolutely false as well. DV occurs in relationships regardless of race, financial status, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or age. The final myth I wanted to talk about was domestic violence is a one-time isolated incident. That is false as well. If it happens once, it'll happen again, and behaviors often escalate over time until the victim chooses to leave or the abuser gets help and changes his or her behavior. So next, I kind of wanted to go over an understanding of domestic violence so we were all talking the same language. So domestic violence is also known as intimate partner violence, and it's a pattern of coercive, controlling behavior that is pervasive and life-threatening. Again, it affects all people in our community, regardless of gender, age, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, religion, social standing, or immigration status. It really centers around power and control that one partner has over the other partner. It can take many different forms: physical, emotional, economics, stalking, harassing, and sexual. And I think it's really important to talk about what domestic violence is not. Domestic violence is not poor anger management skills. In fact, abusers have better anger management skills than the average person. Domestic violence is not a mental health issue. There are no mental health diagnoses that indicate a person is more violent towards one person in particular. It is possible for an abuser to have co-occurring mental health issues. However, it's not mental health issues that's responsible for someone exerting power and control over their partner. Similarly, domestic violence is not caused by alcohol or drug abuse. There might be concurrences that happen. So somebody who is struggling with substance abuse may exacerbate those symptoms of hurting someone or hurting their partner while they're using that substance, but they're not one and the same. And the final issue that domestic violence is not, it is not a couples counseling issue. By saying it's a couples counseling issue, shares some blame with the victim and that there's some joint ownership or that they're doing something that causes them to be abused by their partner. And so that's not what it is. So here's some facts. As I shared, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men will be impacted by domestic violence during their lifetime. And here's another one that astounds me. Every 60 seconds, 20 people are physically abused by an intimate partner, which equates to more than 10 million people annually. We also see that LGBTQ+ individuals face increased rates of domestic and sexual violence and often have a harder time accessing support. And here are some facts kind of around the economics and the costs of the US economy of domestic violence. So it costs us here in the United States more than $13 billion each year, and approximately 900 million of this is a loss of productivity from paid work. So people being unable to kind of complete the jobs that they have been assigned. And to go along with this, approximately 8 million days of paid work is lost annually in the US because of domestic violence. So I really hope this shows you that there's some economic reasons behind why we'd want to stand up and take a stand against domestic violence and support those in our communities that are experiencing it. Besides, of course, kind of the personal emotional issues of why you'd want to support somebody going through this. So here at Safe Alliance, we are open to everybody in the community, but we often see some groups that really are underserved and don't have the tools at their disposal. So we really work hard at reaching these folks. So this includes the LGBTQ+, males, Latinx, people of color, refugees, and people with disabilities. Obviously, there's other underserved populations that this list doesn't capture, but this is the folks that we see having to deal with added barriers through our work here at Safe Alliance. So a lot of times during these presentations, people ask, how did COVID impact domestic violence? So Our national domestic violence hotline here in the US received 20,000 calls daily during the first 2 months of the stay-at-home order, which was an increase by 15%. So that's just a huge increase during these times where people were shut in at home. It sort of makes sense if you think about it. You're locked in your house with your abuser. You don't have your escape to work. You can't escape to church. Everybody's just staying home. So police departments here in the United States reported a 6 to 20% increase in calls for help related to domestic violence during the first month of the pandemic alone. We saw similar statistics here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and Safe Alliance's hotline experienced about a 15% increase in calls as well. And so some of the research that's done so far, kind of looking back at the pandemic, indicates that the data reflects an intensification of domestic violence during the outbreak of COVID-19. And so I wanted to get a little bit more into kind of power and control and how domestic violence is perpetrated. So this wheel kind of talks through all the different elements. Some abusers that are exhibiting partner violence on their kind of spouse or person they're in a relationship with use one, but many use several of these. So I wanted to talk through them because I think this can help serve as red flags as you're kind of watching your relationships kind of around you in your life unfold. So the first one is intimidation. So this we saw in the video where she talked about the gun was sitting out on the dresser. That's just a sign of intimidation. And nobody said, I'm going to shoot you, but just having the gun there, made her feel unsafe. Emotional abuse is another one. So that's, saying something mean to somebody or putting them down. Isolation is one that we frequently see in domestic violence situations. So preventing the partner from having relationships with their friends or colleagues and making them solely dependent on their abuser. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. I didn't hit you. I was just playing. I didn't mean it. Just things that sort of make it seem like it's not serious. And so the person starts to question, well, are they really abusing me? Am I really in a relationship where domestic violence is happening? Another one is often using children. So unfortunately saying, do you want your child to grow up in a single parent household? You don't want me not to be around to be a good father figure or a good mother figure to this child. Another one is kind of the use of privilege. So in a heterosexual relationship, playing on those gender roles in society where, I'm the master of the house and your job is to serve and take care of the house and leave all the big decisions to me. So just using that male privilege. There's ways in, non-heterosexual relationships where that privilege and power can kind of come to play as well. Another one is kind of the use of economics and that sort of abuse. So making the partner ask for money or getting mad if they spend money on any purchases or giving them an allowance where they can only spend X amount per month or per week. So that's just another example of control. And the final one is coercion or threats. So, saying dramatic things like, I'm going to kill myself if you leave, or things that really make the person feel like that person they're in a relationship with is going to hurt themselves, or even things like, oh, I'm going to threaten to report you to DSS and talk about what a bad parent you are if you leave and I have evidence. So just, again, using power and control to keep someone there in their relationship. And so these contributing factors are not what cause domestic violence, but it can heighten it or trigger additional sort of abuses to happen in that relationship. So they're not excuses. So some of these include alcohol and substance abuse, which we talked about, unemployment or trouble with money, low self-esteem. I think belief systems is often an important one to talk about as well. So, certain religions, divorce isn't acceptable. If certain societal pressures within families might say leaving a partner or tolerating that sort of action is more acceptable when it's not. And then a lack of positive role models throughout their life. And then witnessing or experiencing abuse as a child can make someone more likely to perpetrate domestic violence on someone else. But ultimately is a choice to be an abusive partner. These are not reasons why someone is abusive towards their partner. It's always a choice. And there are lots of obstacles for someone leaving. I think sometimes as someone on the outside watching the situation happen, you're like, why don't you just leave? Just pack your bags, grab a suitcase, go to a friend's house. But it's difficult. Fear, isolation, being financially dependent on someone. What about your children? Just feeling like you're guilty or you're to blame for what's happening. Again, belief systems or social pressures and shame. So everybody has their own unique situation, and it's not easy to leave. So just understanding that as you approach a friend or a family member who might be experiencing this, I think is really important for you to know. So here's where I want to kind of segue into recognizing some signs of abuse. We'll kind of talk about it generally and then talk about some signs kind of within the workplace, both remote and in person, you sort of apply to. So some possible signs of abuse are changes in behavior around certain individuals, fears about personal safety and vulnerability, changes in eating and sleeping patterns, hypervigilance, always checking your phone to make sure your partner didn't text you, always having to answer and look at it, missing school, work, or other important appointments just because you're trying to manage your abuser so that you're not continually hurt or your children are not continually hurt. And then somebody who's typically social, more extroverted and kind of engaged, if they withdraw and sort of become more antisocial, that's a red flag that maybe something is going on. I think it's important to note that these are common signs that research has shown is a signal that someone might be experiencing abuse. However, we're all unique human beings, and so how we might react to that trauma can be very different. So here's some specific things about the work environment and how you can recognize signs. So someone who is disheveled when they're typically kind of well-kept and have a really polished public persona, someone who's missing meetings or having to cancel last minute because something's come up and they're just trying to kind of manage that relationship with their partner. In this remote environment, someone who's never on camera, especially if you see a change, you can kind of see tense around certain people, or you constantly see their partner or somebody checking in on them in the background, and you can kind of notice a change in their body language. A lack of productivity from someone who's typically been very productive can also be a red flag, or just difficulty with concentrating. So I think the important thing here is to notice that when these things change, is often can be like a red flag of something going on. And then this hand signal is something that became more prominent that more people know about because of the pandemic and all of us being forced to work from our homes for so long. And so it's kind of the signal where your palm is to the camera and you tuck your thumb in and then you drop your thumb. And so I think people who are looking for help and wanting to kind of let you know that something's going on in their personal life have more awareness around giving this sort of signal. And so that's just something for you to be aware of within your kind of remote work environment. And then as you think about how you support those in your networks that might be experiencing this, I think it's important to talk about kind of the survivor response. There's so many different reactions that we as humans might go through experiencing this trauma. So shock, disbelief, obviously fearful of your personal safety, changes in eating and sleeping, hypervigilance. You might be angry, you show shame and embarrassed that this has happened to you, guilt, betrayal, especially if you feel loyal or that you've been thought of to think of like that you've done something to deserve this and now you're leaving this person. You might feel feelings of betrayal, loss of trust, just with kind of everybody around you, PTSD, and then just as you're trying to kind of put your life back together, missing school, work, other important appointments, and then just sort of seeming unmotivated or apathetic. There's not a typical survivor reaction. In our work here at Safe Alliance, we often have people saying, I feel like I'm going crazy. And we really just try to normalize what somebody's feeling. Everything you're feeling in this situation is okay. Everyone's response to trauma is unique. And so we really just want survivors to feel all their feelings and know that what they're feeling is normal, it is okay, and just to kind of feel those feelings and not feel atypical or like there's something wrong with them. So here are some tips for helping someone dealing with abuse. I think this is the number one thing is believe them. There's so much research that talks about, that first person you tell about your situation and how they react is really going to influence how many more people you tell and what your next step is. So one of the biggest fears of a survivor of domestic or sexual violence is that they won't be believed. So if anybody comes to you to kind of share their story, number one, believe them. The second step is just to listen attentively, empathetically. Don't try to butt in. Don't try to, tell them what you think or, oh, your cousins experienced that too. Just listen. Sometimes a listening ear and that support is all that they need to be able to take the next step. After they've kind of shared their story in a really empathetic and supportive way, you can kind of inform the individual of their options, but don't force anything. Don't press them. Allow him or her to decide what is best for them. And then I think the other thing you need to do is be patient. Do not, participate in the victim blaming of like, oh, it's so easy to leave. Like, why doesn't he or she just pack their bags, move on out? They could come stay with me. Like, why can't they stay? Like, oh, they're asking for it or they want to stay or it's not really serious because they're not leaving. We've seen a lot more research that shows that the most dangerous time and the most time they're likely to be killed is when they're in the process of leaving if things have escalated to that level. And so it's a really delicate balance of, trying to escape the situation safely. And so you've got to be patient and not force their hand. It's really a decision that somebody who's experiencing that sort of violence towards them has to be ready to take that next step. And I know as bystanders, as friends, as family members, as coworkers, it can be really difficult to be patient. But just knowing that you just need to wait and be there to support and listen as someone's kind of going through the steps themselves. And so I wanted to conclude by talking about resources and where to find additional help. So I know some of you from CTE are here in the Charlotte area and some of you are kind of more broadly spread out. And so here in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg region, we have Safe Alliance's Greater Charlotte Hope Line. So this is a 24/7 resource that is free and confidential and offers support around parenting, domestic violence, and sexual assault. So we have highly trained advocates answering the phones every hour of every day and can direct someone who's experiencing, any of these sort of troubles or issues to support, whether that be a Safe Alliance program or making a referral out to other things in our community. So there's also the Domestic Violence National Hotline. So that number is here on the screen as well. So they offer 24/7 phone support and have online chat. If you're a parent of a teen joining us, I think there's often unhealthy relationships or red flags that sort of happen in high school or college age relationships. And so they offer some special support dedicated just to teens. And so you're able to get some tech support by texting "Love Is" to the number on the screen. And I know the great thing about one of our resources here with Safe Alliance is that even if you're a bystander or, observe this throughout, whether your church environment, your social network, or at work, and don't know what to do, our advocates are also trained to kind of coach you on next steps or how you support someone. So if you've observed something and just have a question about what you should say, what you should do, how you should approach that situation, you can kind of give our Charlotte Hope Line number a call as well. And our advocates will kind of talk you through what you could do to support them and how you can kind of connect them with Safe Alliance's services when they're ready. So the final resource I wanted to talk about was domesticshelters.org. And so it's a database of shelters throughout the US and Canada and how to get in contact with them. So here for Safe Alliance, our entry point is the Greater Charlotte Hope Line. We also work with CMPD in the hospitals, but if you know somebody who you think needs a place to stay as they're leaving, calling that Hope Line number is the best way to kind of get them into our funnel to get support through Safe Alliance's services as well, which includes our shelter. And so the other great thing at CTE here at your Human Resource Department and Employee Assistance Program, I think Carl and Courtney will be talking through what you all offer and can support colleagues in that way. Thank you.
So thank you, Sarah-Kate. That was very powerful, and I certainly feel much better prepared to be able to be a better advocate for my coworkers here and for other people that I know just socially inside and outside of work. As Sarah-Kate mentioned, we do have additional internal resources on top of those wonderful resources that Sarah-Kate shared with us. We do have an employee assistance program, and we offer up to 6 sessions a year for free as part of our overall employee benefits. And then also have the ability to contact our HR business partners and Leah Beard and Laura McMillan on the CAT side and on the Lift One side are fantastic partners for all of us for any type of personal and confidential situation that we might have. And again, on the bottom of the screen, we get a reminder about that National Domestic Violence Hotline number as well.
So we're going to open it up for questions. Feel free to submit any via the chat for Sarah-Kate, and we will leave that open for everybody.
Thank you, Sarah-Kate. Thanks, everyone. While we're waiting for some questions to come in, I had a question, and Sarah-Kate, I know you counseled us to call our Safe Alliance or to call our local shelter, and an advocate can help us talk through and provide some messaging to a friend or a relative or someone if we suspect that they are going through the situation. But what would you say to us right now? Are there any tips that you can share to kind of help us get that conversation started, or just whatever can we do to support them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think sometimes you don't know if you've seen something that is worthwhile of saying something. I think there's some misinformation about what domestic violence is, which is why I kind of wanted to start the conversation around, what it is and what it isn't. So I think questions like, oh, how's it going with so-and-so? Or, just kind of checking in on the relationship to see if somebody's going to open up to you. You may know for a fact that, it's not a healthy relationship and there's lots of those red flags. So just kind of asking that general question and being an attentive listener will sort of allow someone to open up to you if they're ready. You obviously can't force their hand, and they may not be ready to share because of shame, guilt, societal pressures or things like that. But just showing you're there and willing to listen and demonstrating that through your relationships and conversation with somebody, I think is the best thing you can do as kind of as a friend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about people who continue to go back to the situation, to an abusive relationship? Is there anything specific that we can help without over assuming? What do we do in those situations?
Again, I think it all comes back to just kind of listening and letting someone know you're there. You can't force them to leave. You can't force them to stay away. There's codependencies there. It's complicated, and often the two of them in that relationship are really the only one who fully understand the dynamics at play. And so I think just always letting somebody know that you're there for them, you're willing to support them, help connect them to resources. And so it's a fine line to walk between kind of forcing resources or, I'm only going to support you if you leave, versus feeling like kind of a passive bystander. And so just as you work on that relationship with that individual, just constantly reaffirming that you're there to listen and support and you're on their side no matter what.
Mm-hmm. We got a question comes in that says, how, and you talked a little bit about this, Sarah-Kate, how you help without over assuming. What if someone is having a bad day, and that is a fine line. Do you have any advice around that?
Yeah, I think we often suggest kind of asking general questions. Hey, how's it going today? Or I noticed X, Y, and Z. Is there anything I can do to support you? So just kind of asking those questions and demonstrating that you're a caring friend and are going to be supportive of them no matter what they say, and are going to be an active listener and believe them, are really kind of creating opportunities and opening the door for them to be willing to kind of share those vulnerabilities and those situations with you.
We got another question in. Besides listening and encouraging a victim to seek help, what else can you do to support someone who's experiencing domestic violence?
That's great. I think kind of educating them about what domestic violence is. I feel like sometimes people only think, it's physical abuse. And so that kind of wheel of power and control that shows all the different areas that someone who's showing abuse onto someone else is doing is one way to help really have the victim understand what they're going through. I think it's unfortunate people think it's only physical. And so kind of sharing some of that information might help them come to the realization that it's a lot bigger of a deal and more of an issue than just an isolated incident where there's some physical violence. So I think that's one thing that you can do that feels a little bit more actionable, is helping educate them. I know it's difficult to be a bystander and just listen and support and really kind of wait for them to take the next step, but it's kind of their life. And so offering support and listening is really the best thing to do. If they get to the point where they're safety planning and trying to get ready to leave, obviously, if you feel comfortable or offering a place for them to stay so they don't need an emergency shelter, taking their kids for the afternoon so they can go to court and get a domestic violence protection order, just some of those logistical things, and helping them leave if you have that sort of relationship and that level of relationship with somebody could be really helpful as they try to navigate the process of, kind of packing up their lives quickly and taking that step to begin healing from their trauma and begin life anew without that partner.
We got another question about the hand signal that you shared, and that was really meaningful, especially for me. I know that I'll be on the lookout for that as well. Is that an in-person hand signal as well that we would be looking for, or is that typically just shared online? Is there anything else that people might be cueing sort of externally to signal for help?
Yeah, I know it really became much more prominent, something that we started including in our presentations during COVID because everybody was so remote and there wasn't opportunities for water cooler conversations or bumping into somebody in the coffee line, sort of where those more casual personal conversations are often held. And so I think it probably could work if somebody knows what it means in a in-person setting, but those are often conversation or points where you can have conversations to check in on somebody a little bit more naturally than only when a scheduled Zoom meeting is occurring and you're on camera together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The questions are really kind of coming in here to me. So here's a really excellent one. Is it ever appropriate to make a report to the police if you suspect domestic violence, or do you leave it up to the person experiencing domestic violence? How would you handle that situation?
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky one. So obviously, if you make a complaint to the police are probably going to investigate it. And that can obviously really anger the abuser, which could cause them to escalate. And so I think it's really a delicate balance of, are there guns or weapons in the household? What type of abuse? What kind of tools is the abuser using as they show power and control over the person? I obviously understand, needing to say something or get involved, especially if you think something is going to happen that's lethal. But I think it's a really delicate balance and really individualized. The great thing about our counseling line and our hotline is that our advocates have tons and tons of hours of training and can kind of talk through those dynamics with you as experts to see, is it worth filing a police report? Our number's unlisted. So sometimes we have people call in and say, hey, will you give my cousin a call? She's available at work at this hour and I know she'll be safe from the abuser then. And so our hotline advocates will go ahead and call as long as we know that the person knows that we're calling. We don't ever want to call and surprise somebody or not have somebody who's ready to accept our help. And so I would really guide people to just use the hotline and kind of talk through those individual specific scenarios with our advocates to seek the best guidance and next steps in the relationship that they're seeing and trying to help support.
All right. We have a request from the audience to share the hand signal again. And then on the slides, could we go back to that hotline number too? Because I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to write that down and make sure that we have this readily available. So Sarah-Kate, if you could share the hand signal again it's on slide. Thank you.
Tucking in your thumb and then bending your fingers over it. So kind of like you would close your finger and then make a fist around it. Yeah, and so if you're in the Charlotte Mecklenburg kind of greater region, that top line 980-771-HOPE is Safe Alliance's Greater Charlotte Hope line. And then if you're in a broader kind of area as part of CTE, the domestic violence hotline that's national is the best bet for you for support. So that's 1-800-799-SAFE.
Great. Do we have time for a few additional questions? Because we're getting a few additional ones, if that's okay with you. Some great discussion from the audience. So we know that there are shelters for women in need of help, but what about places for men to go to help?
Yeah, our shelter here is not specifically for women. We've had, even in the last 2 years, several men and men with children who have been there in the shelter. And so, it's sort of set up in suite style and dorm style. And so, you're not sharing bathrooms with a stranger that you don't know. And so it's welcome for men, women, everybody who needs support and a place to stay at our shelter is welcome there.
All right, we have a question here, and it took me a moment to read through it, but I believe the question is, are there resources that Safe Alliance has that so people who may be aware that they have a problem and they want to get help, that they're not a victim of domestic violence, but perhaps they're dealing with some anger management issues. So people who have that self-awareness, does Safe Alliance offer counseling or support or resources for those individuals as well? I believe I've gotten this question correct.
Yeah, so we don't ourselves provide counseling, but we are such a connector in the community. And so keep a robust, up-to-date roster of, all the different types of resources that anybody who sort of is influenced or impacted by domestic violence and sexual assault. And so we're able to make referrals out or connect people with other government agencies and other nonprofits and organizations and businesses throughout kind of our area to get kind of the services they need, whether they're trying to work on anger management skills or whether they went through an abusive relationship 20 years ago and that trauma is sort of resurfaced. We're there to be a resource and a connector for people, even if it's not a direct Safe Alliance service that they need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have you found that it is typical for people experiencing domestic violence to go back to their scenario? And do they go back a certain number of times, or is it on a case-by-case situation?
It's often a case-by-case situation. It is one of the metrics that we measure. So we stay in touch with people when they leave the shelter, and we really work during their time at the shelter to make sure they have a safe place to transition to. Our shelter residents can stay with us for up to 90 days. The average stay is about 70, and it rose closer to 90 during COVID just because it was so hard to find a place to live and kind of jump through all the hoops to get background checks and deposits and all those things down for different apartments. And so we do track it. And I think last year for the fiscal year, 87% of people who left our shelter went to live in a violence-free home environment. And so that's for kind of a period of, I think, 6 months after obviously they've left the shelter. It's a challenge with affordable housing. That's why we're really becoming an active voice within that sort of landscape, because if you've been a 2-income household or you weren't allowed to work, how do you kind of restart your life and get a job and be able to afford housing somewhere that's safe? And so when you start worrying about finances and where your kids are going to live and sleep, it becomes even more tempting to go back to an unhealthy relationship. So we work with partners across the city and county to kind of combat this affordable housing situation that we're seeing, so that our families that are leaving the shelter can find somewhere that's safe and affordable for them to kind of continue on with their lives.
Mm-hmm. We have one more question here. I think it's one question, 2 parts.
Okay.
It is the court system with the process of a domestic violence protection, very difficult to navigate. And so does Safe Alliance provide advocates when filing this domestic violence order? How does that work?
Yeah, so we have our program, our victim assistance court program. So we have an office that's right next to the courthouse. The magistrates, clerks often send people our way. And so we're open the same hours as the court. And so you can just walk in and tell your story to an advocate, and they'll help you draft a domestic violence protection order. We're unique in that we have staff attorneys that will review your order to make sure it's the strongest case possible. And then we'll accompany you to court. And so we'll be there to hold your hand, stand by your side, so that you're not having to face your abuser alone. So that's just one of the great things that we offer. And then from there, we can help you get connected with counseling services, shelter if you need it, support groups through the county. It's sort of another entry point for us to our services. So that's a great question. Well,
the questions have died down. We were really going, quickly through them there. And I just want to encourage everyone who's on the call, if you think of something, send an email to Women Lead. We're happy to get you an answer to your question. And Sarah-Kate, thank you so much for all of the important work that you're doing, that Safe Alliance is doing. It's incredible. This was a very moving experience for me to learn more about this. And let me turn it back over to our host. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah-Kate. So to go a step further to help Safe Alliance and other domestic violence shelters, Women Lead will be holding a collection drive starting tomorrow and going through April 27th. It's April 27th, so for 2 weeks. This list on the screen has been compiled based on the needs of shelters throughout CT's footprint. So the Community Impact Pillar has reached out to different locations in all of the areas we serve, and this is pretty much a comprehensive list of what they're requesting. So Women Lead and the Community Impact Pillar would like to encourage everyone to donate what you can, but with the intention of promoting the 2022 National Women's History theme of women providing healing and promoting hope. So the idea is through this drive, we want to assist shelters like Safe Alliance with their needs so they're able to provide healing and promote hope to all of the women and men that they support. So our branch champions that are listed on the screen will be assisting in this collection drive and providing the collection information in their local branches that they will have today to put out for tomorrow. So if you would like to become a branch champion and don't see your name on this list, feel free to email Rachel Bunn at rbunn@ct1926.com, and she will definitely get you the information you need. So I would like to thank Sarah-Kate again with Safe Alliance for providing all of the amazing information you've shared today, and for Safe Alliance for everything that you do to support these victims. We'd also like to thank Carl for being our host and an amazing ally for Women Lead. And then I'd like to thank everybody for joining and taking the time out of your day. And my hope for this is that we can take away all of this valuable information, even just, one tidbit, if you can just retain that, to make us more aware of our coworkers and others in our life and learn how to be an ally for them if they are in this kind of situation. So again, thank you everybody, and I hope you have a great week.